I hope that whatever else you've noticed this week, that you've noticed the red buds. I hope that whatever else you've paid attention to this week, that you've paid attention to the cherry blossoms. Wherever you walk or drive, whatever you stare at, whatever else you've done or accomplished this week, I really hope you've seen some hydrangea leaves budding, or maybe the Japanese magnolia's early pinky purple blossoms emerging. Maybe you went out of your way to the Dixon to see those tulips. Yes, there's still a lot of brown, still so many bare branches, and yes, there are other things to pay attention to. Headlines and deadlines, appointments and errands. Still, did you see nature's first green is gold? Spring, not fully here but hinted at, unfinished, but on the way. And as we traveled through these stories this morning, there was a lot to pay attention to, but did you notice even here in our stories that blazing bush bright on the landscape? Here too, the barren and dry land of the psalmist, and finally, that struggling fig tree. I admit that it can be hard to notice all the beauty on its way, the almostness of all of that, against the bold print of headlines. Even if, or especially when, the headlines are so ugly and gory. In the days of Moses, the headlines blared about misery and oppression and a tyrant king. In the days of Jesus, the breaking news was about the capricious violence of Pilate and the tragedy of disaster. And the people then, perhaps like us, some days wondered if all this earthly turmoil had a divine cause. It's a recurring line of questioning you may have noticed. Something awful happened. I wonder why God is punishing them. The world is tumultuous and scary. How can we grab control? And if not control of events, then at least control of the narrative. Heartbreaking news for that family. They were worse sinners, don't you think? It's a dumpster fire out here. Surely God has abandoned us all. It's strange how we keep trying to ascribe God's judgment on people when God has been saying for millennia, I know they're suffering and I have come down to deliver them. And follows that with, I will be with you on your journey out of this place. Funny how we keep repeating the same questions about what those other people must have done to bring on such tragedies when Jesus flatly said, no, that's not how it works. I don't know why that wasn't the end of the conversation 2,000 years ago. Well, okay. I actually do know why. Maybe you, would really like to pin the blame on some egregious behavior on their part that led to some hardship for them because it helps me sleep better at night, especially if I can convince myself that I haven't done anything quite as egregious. But God said, I want an end to their suffering. I will be with you. Jesus said, no, that's not how it works. Still, we keep trying to connect the dots and draw that picture, revealing a pattern of cause and effect. Did you notice how in all these stories, the suffering and the hurt is still very real? It's only the causal relationship to sin that's denied, not the pain of living in the world. No, they aren't worse sinners. I'm not punishing them. And yes, the world is broken and chaotic. It hurts. Death is part of the equation. And death looks like a lot of things even before our final end. Deaths of relationships, deaths of hope. It looks like the barren and dry land of disconnection. It's seeing a bleak landscape in front of us, no matter the season. What then is the opposite of death? Well, life, of course. And life, by at least some definition, means growth and change. So the next piece of the story in all these stories is about movement. Get moving, because moving, traveling, changing, evolving, growing is what life looks like. Repenting, changing, turning around, heading for the promised land is the path toward life. It is the path of life. Destruction, enslavement, even death are part of this troubled and broken world. And God desires none of that for us. The reminder and the invitation when we are confronted with cruelty and volatility is not to paint over it with blame for them or for God, but to recall that the time is always right to make right what we can in our own lives, for our own hearts, and within the corners of the kingdom that we can reach. They came to tell Jesus about those murdered Galileans and the victims of the tower collapse. And Jesus heard their unspoken assumption, weren't they worse? And the deeper admission, am I safe or not? I want to feel secure. We keep trying to implicate God in tragedies and to pacify ourselves. And Jesus says, no. And Jesus says in the same breath, he pivots to make the point he came to make, to insist that we must repent. We must change our ways, which is another way of saying we must live. The world is unpredictable and our time is short no matter how much time we have. So there is always an urgency to his hopeful message for us to choose the path of life instead of perishing and wallowing, stagnant in despair and death. I have a little Post-it note on my laptop that says chaotic and incomplete. I actually brought it in, just put visual aid today. I scrawled it while listening to an audiobook last winter. It felt like such an apt description of the world, chaotic and incomplete. The speaker was naming the truth of her experience and especially her frustration with this place we call home. I share her frustration a lot of days. In light of the gospel, though, I wonder if this little Post-it note is not all bad news. Chaos, yes. Bad news. Pharaohs and pilots and disasters abound, generation after generation. But incompleteness. What if that's the glimmer of good news? Things are incomplete and unfinished. You and I are not done. We have time. Who knows how much, but today. And if the story isn't over, then all is not lost. Repent, change, start again, forgive, ask for forgiveness. Life looks like change and new growth. Maybe the headline isn't actually the national news of state-sponsored terror in any time or place. Maybe the breaking news is the blooming bush, the fig tree, or the redbud, or even some early dogwood. What if paying attention to the early golden green and the branch tips is just as important, or dare we believe even more important than the doom scroll of daily news? The headlines we write are of ruin and blame. The word from God is, the story isn't finished yet. You aren't finished yet. God is not finished yet. So we look up and see the incompleteness of spring on the horizon. The fig tree branches haven't borne fruit yet, but those branches might yet bear fruit, especially with the caretaking of a loving gardener God, willing to wait a little bit longer and tend and care while waiting. A God who does not desire that we stay in servitude to the powers of Pharaoh, but who comes to be with us as we begin what will be a very long journey toward that good and broad land, toward the land of milk and honey. A God who looks at us and sees that we aren't yet where we could be. A God who looks at us and sees that we aren't yet what we could be. We are not at full blossom. And so this God shows up not with an axe, but with a shovel and a wheelbarrow full of mulch, patience, and hope. It's chaotic around here, but not because God is doling out disease and violence, not assigning tyrants or structural collapses or natural disasters to that group over there to make a point. God is meeting all of us, beloved sinners, in our messy, unfinished incompleteness, reminding us that it's time, even today, to turn toward life.